Hello guys, welcome. Can you hear me? Okay, so today we'll mostly be talking about React.js and what it's all about, and we'll basically just be going through a small demo app that's been created in React.js to get a understanding of the basic concepts that are involved. So let's wait for a couple more minutes for people to join, and then we can get started with the lecture. Hi everyone, welcome to the third lecture in our Dev Club lecture series, and today we'll be talking about a brief introduction to React.js. So let's get started. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. So basically what React.js is and how we should get started. Then we're going to take a deep dive into some of the code that we wrote for a sample app. And then we're going to be talking through what's actually happening and what's going on in that app. And then we're just going to be looking at some alternatives and we can take any questions that you have at the end of the lecture. So about React.js. So if you just simply Google React.js on this is basically the first result that you'll see that React is an open source front-end JavaScript library for building user interfaces or UI components. I know that sounds like a lot right now, but as we go through the lecture, I assure you that this will become clearer. So yes, it allows us to create large web applications that use data which can change over time. And the best part is you don't even have to reload the page. As soon as you make any changes in the in your React code, it will automatically update and the changes will get reflected in the browser. It's fast, simple, and scalable. And what do we mean by scalable? React works on a series of components, and you can just reuse these components from one part of the web app to the other, and you can easily replicate stuff that otherwise you'll have to read an entire code for. So we'll say a bit more about this later on. Who uses React? So these are some major corporations that use React. We have Instagram, Netflix, Pinterest, Facebook, and of course, we at Dev Club love React and we use it in most of our projects as well. Now, let's see how we should get started with React. So these are the basic things that you need to get started with React. First of all, the basic requirement is Node.js, and then you need a code editor of your choice. You can use VS Code, Sublime Text, but I'd personally recommend VS Code. And obviously, a can-do attitude. Things can be a bit tough at the start, but you need to keep going, and eventually you'll get the hang of it. So yeah, so these are the basic steps you need to create a React app. We shared these instructions beforehand as well, so I'm sure most of you uh, must have already done this. But if you're not, then you can just like leave some questions in the chat, and we'll be there to help you out. But apart from that, so I'll just talk through the basic steps briefly. So you'll need to create a React app, and for doing that, you just need to open into any folder in the terminal or command shell, and you can run a command, which is the npx create react app command, which we also shared to you through the Discord server, so you can check it out from there. And once your React app is created, you can begin coding. So yeah, now once you create a React app, so this is what a typical folder structure would look like. This is a scaled up React app, so you'll see, let me just share a structure of the code. So yeah, earlier we just shared a GitHub repo, and in that it contains some sample code. So this is what that code looked like. It's a very simple code, and I'll give you a live demo of this. But let's just have a look at the brief folder structure. So once you initialize a React app, you'll see a source folder. So most of your source code that you write, everything that goes into your source folder, and you have a public folder which contains the index.html file. This is practically the only HTML file there is in the entire React app. It's a single page application, and the content inside this HTML file is rendered dynamically using JavaScript. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's see. You can, in the source folder, in the root of the source folder, you can see an index.js file. And over here, you can see that this app is being rendered inside the root element of your document. Now, you may ask where this root element can actually be found. Okay, so this says document.getElementById. by ID. I'm sure in the previous lecture you saw query selectors using JavaScript. So this is just basically targeting an element with the ID of root. Now you may wonder where that is. So that is easily found in the index.html file. As you can see, here it is. This is just the plain HTML file, and it just contains one element, which is the root element with an ID of root. It's a div element with an ID of root, and uh, this file is basically targeting that element and inserting our GSX code into it. Yeah. So once you scale up, and right now the source folder contains two things. So it contains components, and that's about it. The rest, there are no other things right now because this is just a very simple app. But as you scale up, and I mentioned that React is very scalable and it can be used to create large projects, you'd want to keep your code neat and organized. So that's where a nicely organized folder structure comes in. You can see that you have components. So components can refer to short, small things about a React app that you want to see. So let's see on this page that you see right now, you can see that this is a button. This can technically be known as a component. And you can see that all of these are drop-down menus. These can be components in itself. Now, you have higher order components. Higher order components are basically, let's just say, we'll talk about that later. So pages, you have pages. So as I mentioned, you can create lots of a very large web app in React. So you can have multiple pages over there. You can have a page for profile, you can have a page for settings. So the individual code for the pages will go over here. And then you have utilities. Utilities is basic function that you would need, such as checking if someone has entered a valid email. So these could be written in simple JavaScript, and they could take a simple parameter such as a string, and you can just return whether it's a valid email or not. So these are basically utility functions that do not perform a core element of your web app, but help you to help you to do certain other stuff and makes things easier. So you can see we can have error handling over here and all that. So yeah. Now I'd like to request you all to actually clone this GitHub repo. And actually, let's not clone it. You can just go over here and see the code inside of it. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. I'll give you 2-3 minutes. Meanwhile, I'll open up my chat. Yep, I'll put the link in the chat as well. I'm sending it again. So yeah, don't just try to start that app right now. That will take you some time. So I'll walk you through the steps. So once that app is started, which I'll get to in a minute, this is what you'll see. So this is basically a simple React app which contains 3 timers, and this timer in itself is an individual component. You can click on start, and as you can see, the timer starts counting down. And each of these timers work independently. So as you can see, the countdown of one timer is completely independent from the other. So as you can see, it's scalable as well. I can have as many timers as I want. And right now, I've just taken a very simple example, which is a timer. You can create an infinite amount of components according to your choice. I can reset my timers if I want. And yeah, so I'll talk about how to get started with this. So yeah, so beforehand, you must have all run npx create React app, right? So you must have gotten something like an app.js file. So what I want you to do is just clear up that file and copy this entire code from the GitHub repo that I told from the GitHub repo link that I just sent, and copy this entire code into your app.js file. I'm in the chat, and if you have any questions, you can ask me. Don't worry, I'll walk you through the entire code. So I just want to help you get started with a React app first, and then we'll walk through what each component does and how it's working. I'll send you the exact link to the app.js file if you need. This is the app.js file, and I'm sending it to you on the chat. You can copy and paste this code. Uh, you do not need to clone the repo. You can just use that create React app function that we told you to beforehand in Discord. You can go into the root directory and you can use that. So actually, meanwhile, let me just create another React app. So I'm also doing it with you guys. So if you need any help, I'm in the chat and we can do it together. Yeah, right now only app.js. I'll guide you through the other code as well. It won't compile right now. We have to paste some other code as well. So I just wanted to be started with app.js, and then we can add the other files to actually finally run our app. Yeah. So once you initialize a React app, this is what you'll see by default. You'll see an app.js file, and I just want you to remove this entire code and paste the code from this file over there. Now, once you've done that, I want you to go into the source folder and create a new folder called components. And in the components folder, create a new file called timer.jsx and make sure that the T is capital. That's essential. For the timer.jsx file, I'm sending you another link. You can use the code from there. Copy and paste this code from the timer.jsx file into the file that you just created. Are we having any trouble, guys? You can let me know in the chat if you need any help with this stuff, but this is pretty basic, so we'll get into the explanation in just a couple of minutes. And the final file that you'll need after you've done that is the CSS file, which is just for like basic styling and stuff. The link to that I'll also send in the chat. Yeah, sure. I'll repeat from app.js. So first of all, you need to go into your app.js file and just remove the entirety of the code that was there and copy and paste this code, the timer code. And once you've done that, create a new folder called components and inside that create a file called timer.jsx. Just put something like a done or okay if you're done with the steps that I just mentioned. And if you need any help, just leave a message in the chat. Great. Perfect. So a lot of people are starting to be done. So the next step that you do is, now that you have the basic requirements of React, so once you're in the directory, you can do npm start. I'll be doing yarn start, but you can do npm start. It doesn't matter. This is just like a slightly different package manager that I have installed, but you can use npm start in the directory in which you have your React app. And hopefully this will compile. So just give it a minute to load. Yeah. In the directory in which you created your React app, you can, yeah, in the terminal. npm start should work. Yeah. npm start is the exact command. And you'll see something like, you'll see a warning over there, but just neglect that for now. The directory, the root directory of the folder, just inside the folder. You don't need to be in the source directory, just the root directory, which is this one. Like you can see the source folder, you can see public, you can see node modules. The one which contains package.json, that's the directory that you should be in when running npm start. And once you started your React app, just leave a done message over there so that I know you guys are following along. And if you have any trouble, let me know in the chat as well. And are you guys seeing the timer screen as well? Perfect. So we're seeing some people starting to be done. I'll just wait another couple minutes. Also, guys, if you're like left behind, I can repeat any of the steps that you need. And yeah, there's no issue. I'm waiting for some time. And if you're left behind any step or you don't know which files you have to use, just let me know and I'll repeat the steps all over again. I know this can seem a lot right now, but I promise you I'll explain every step that we've done. And I'll also explain the significance of the code that we have. But I just wanted to show you the power of React before I actually started explaining it to you. So that's why we're doing this stuff beforehand, before actually seeing any of the concepts. Because if I just told you the concept simply, then you wouldn't be able to relate to anything significantly. And that's why I just wanted to give you a reference of something. So which file to use in terminal? What should happen after we do it's npm start, not npm. And once you do npm start, you'll see a warning over here, something like this. You'll say compiled with warnings and you'll see something like this. Yeah, new browser will open and it'll open up to localhost 3000. You don't have to use any file in the terminal, just in the root directory in which you have your React app cannot find the does not match corresponding. Yeah. Arincadia, it says cannot find file. So just make sure that in the root directory, your folder is named components and you have a file there called timer.jsx. Just make sure that this is the directory structure. Let me just zoom in. In the source folder, you'll have another folder called components. And in the components, you should have a file named timer.jsx with a capital T. And if it still doesn't work, then just stop the command. Like you must have done npm start on your terminal, right? Just do control C, that will stop the command and you can try it again. Yep, the root, you need to run the npm start in the root folder, which is the folder containing package.json file. I'll wait for another 2-3 minutes because some of you are running into troubles, so no issues. Something, can you explain some mine? Okay, so Sankalp, if it says something is already running on 3000, are you sure you haven't already done npm start? And if you have, you can just press yes or Y if it asks that, and it will open up it will open up the app on 3001. Yes, I'll explain to you how this is working. I just wanted to show you what we'll be working on today. So that way you'll actually get some reference while I'm explaining things. Sudhanshu, is your app working? Great. Yep, perfect. Okay, so I'll repeat from the start one last time, and after that, I'll get started with how the actual code actually works, and we'll get into the concepts of React. So the first thing that you need is to go into app.js and remove everything that was there and copy paste code from the GitHub repo. Copy paste the code from GitHub repo. I'll send the link again if you need. So this is the app.js file. And do the same for app.css. Just remove everything that was there and copy paste this code. On typing yes, multiple Y's are getting printed. Just type Y, I think that should work, and it'll open up on 3001. Yeah, so I mean, if you're left behind, you can just start like rewinding the video, so that should help you out. Yeah, so I think most of you or a majority of you have got your app to be working. So if anyone's still running into trouble, just like leave a message right now, and we have some members of our team, and they'll help you out. So, and yeah, you can always rewind the video and come back to it later if you need. So, okay, yeah. So as I told you, each of these timers is running individually, and every timer itself is a component. Now, what do I mean by components? So let's see. So components are the core building blocks. Let me just present my screen. Yeah. So components are the building blocks of React. So this is like typical React structure. You have an app, and you have a nested children. So one thing to note over here that a React component is always starting with a capital letter. As you can see, and app is A and nested children is N. So the reason for that is because standard HTML elements, they begin with small letters. So like you have, let me just open up my VS Code. So like you have a div over here. So this div has, I hope you can see my screen. I made it a bit large for you guys. So this div is starting off with a small letter. So, and whereas this timer is a React component, that's why it's starting off with a capital T. So the reason for doing that is so that React components can be easily differentiated from standard HTML, and you know what component is a React component and what component is standard HTML component. And that's why you'll also notice that I gave the file a capital name. So it starts with a capital T and not like a small t. So yeah, and as you can see, like there are three components. Now you can try this as well. So if I duplicate this component one more or two more times, so I can see now there are five timers. And as soon as I save this file, let me do Command S, and I go back to my screen. And I go back to my screen. You can see that there are now five timers automatically. One, two, three, four, five. And as you notice, I didn't even have to refresh my page. And now let's say I delete a timer and I save my file. Now there are four timers and I didn't have to do anything. It all updated automatically for me. And each of these timers, as you can see, is performing the same function, and I don't have to write any extra code. And it's completely scalable, and I don't have to write any extra code. All I have to do is just reuse that component which I made. So we'll also look at learning to create a component, but right now just wanted to show you what a component actually is. Now I have five timers and I refresh the page, another timer popped in, and each of these components are completely self-dependent. Now, what do I mean by self-dependent? I mean that they don't have any external dependencies as of now. So I can just do this. I can do none of these timers is dependent on the other one. They're completely independent. Working to copy. No. Yeah, you didn't copy the CSS file. That's why the style was slightly off. So I'm sure in the last lecture, you learned that CSS is for styling. Can without, yes, we can change the duration as well. No, now we'll be coming to that next. Yeah. So before that, you may wonder like this file, the component file, the timer.jsx, this has an extension of JSX. Now you may be wondering what that actually means. So JSX is not HTML. Let me just close this out. Yeah, JSX is not HTML, but it looks a lot like that. So what JSX allows us to do is, if you open up this file and scroll to line number, yeah. So what JSX allows us to do is write JavaScript code inside of HTML. So earlier, what you had to do was vanilla JS, you had to use the dot create element command in order to manipulate the DOM. And I'm sure you must have learned a bit about this in your last lecture, but so if you ever want to manipulate HTML with JavaScript, what you have to do is you have to target that element, and then you have to use things like inner HTML, or you'll have to use things like inner text, or you'll have to use document.query selectors and all that. So in React, you don't need to do all that. You have a JSX, you have JSX file extensions which allow us to directly write JavaScript code inside of HTML. And what do I mean by that? So if like this looks like standard HTML, right? Section, div. But if you look closely, it's also very different from standard HTML because you you see these conditional properties, and you see event listeners, and you have uh, and also you can the most notable change is that you have a class name instead of class. So if you're writing in HTML, you do div class equals to something, and you'll close out that div. Whereas in JSX, you don't have class. You do class name for giving an element a class. So those are just like some of the notable differences between JSX and HTML. And you don't need to worry about all this logic. I'll explain all this logic that we've written here as well as we walk forward. So now, are there any doubts? I gave an extension and it's working fine. JS, when I give it a JSX error, yeah, you can just copy the whole source folder from the repo as well. That should also work. Mm, I was thinking, yeah, so do you have any questions about JSX or differences between HTML or JSX right now? Okay, so I'm not seeing anything, so I'll move forward. So this is just a typical, let's forget about this. Yeah. So now another important and core concept of React are props and states. Okay. So now, if you go into an app.js file, you'll see I have written duration over here. So this duration is formally known as a prop in React. Now you may be wondering what a prop means. So I mentioned that React is based on nesting of components, right? So you have this app component, and you have this app component, and you have inside the app component, you have the timer component. So all of these are nested, and what you're passing in this component, duration, this is known as a prop. So what a prop does is it allows us to pass properties from a parent component to a child component. And what do I mean by parent and child? So the component which is the top, which is in this case app, that's known as a parent component. Whereas all the things that are nested inside of it, those are known as children components. So over here you can see that timer is a children component, whereas app would be the parent component to timer. And this duration, this is known as a prop. It allows us to pass properties from our parent component, which in this case is app.js, to our child component, which is timer. So, and now someone was wondering that how we can change the duration of the timer without actually having to write additional code. So this duration is actually a prop. So let's say I pass in 10 over here, and this duration is in seconds. So let's say I pass in 10 and I save the code and I go to my React app. You can see that time remaining it shows as 10 seconds now. And all I had to do was change the prop. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to write any additional code. So that's one of the most powerful feature of React. You can pass down values as props, and you can reuse components. So let's say I was cooking something and I want a timer for 30 seconds. Then I can just change the duration to 30 seconds, and I can save it, and it automatically gets updated. The time remaining is 30 seconds. So now when I start my timer, it'll start counting down from 30 instead of 5 seconds. Is there any, do you have any questions about props? Yeah. And also another key feature about props is once you pass in a prop, it automatically updates the child component. So let's say I passed in 10 over here. So as you can see, this HTML also updated automatically because it knew that I changed the prop, and it needs to update the content that's actually visible to the user according to the value that's being passed in the prop. So let's say I passed in 100 over here. So now it needs to start counting down from 100. So apart from just the logic, which is it actually count down from 100, it's also displaying the updated values, like you can see in HTML. So it takes care of the logic as well as the rendering of content. And what do I mean by rendering of content? Rendering means things that are visible on the screen. So this component is being rendered onto the screen. Similarly, whenever this prop updates, the corresponding changes are made while rendering of the element. So as you can see, I updated this prop to show 90. So this content also updated, uh, not just like in the form of logic, such that it's the number 90, but also in the form of displaying 90. Yeah. Yeah, as you can see, so this is an example of props. It allows us to pass data from the parent to the child component. So the parent is the wrapper component and the child is the embedded component. So as you can see over here, posts, that's the parent, and this post is the child. And I'm passing a prop title to my post. And once I'm passing that title, I can use it in my child component as such. I'll show you this. So now let's see how we can create a component. Yeah. Let's see. So in order to create a component, let me just create a new file, and you can name it as first comp.jsx. And yeah. So now we'll be creating a first component. The basic requirement for writing JSX is we need to import React. So we need to do import React from React. So this is a very basic statement that we need to write in order to use JSX and write JSX in our file. Are you guys following along, or are you having erroneous value? What happens when you enter an erroneous value? Yeah, you can try it out. It'll give you, yeah, you have to handle the corner cases inside your child element. So let's say instead of a number, duration was expecting a number, right? So let's say instead of a number, I gave it a string. So it would run into errors because obviously it can't count down from a string. So you'll have to handle those errors when you're working with props. So I hope you're following along now. So let's create a component. So this will be our first component. So I just named it as first comp.jsx, but you can name it anything you want. And the basic prerequisite for creating a component is you need to import React first of all. So what this does, it allows us to write JSX code instead of like just like static HTML. Now, what you need to do is you need to create a function. So let's say, and the function name would be the name of your component. So let's say my function is const fun. My Also, it's a convention in React to give your function name the same name as the file name. So I can do const first comp is equal to this. So now you may be wondering what I've done here, but this is nothing but a new sort of syntax for function, and this is equivalent to me writing this. So these two statements are practically identical except for like just the structuring. So this is called like a normal function that you see, whereas this is known as an arrow function. And what this does, if you write an arrow function, it just helps to keep the code clearer and easier to understand because we're reducing the dependency of a word such as function. So these two statements essentially do the same thing. So yeah, you have first component. And now in order for any component to be of any use, we have to have a return statement inside of that component. So I have to have a return statement, and in the return statement, I always have to return a single element. And what do I mean by single element? So I mean that let's say I have div some content and I have another div over here, some more content. Now the issue with this is, as you can see, that even VS Code or my linter is giving me an issue. It says that it must be wrapped in one parent element. So that's a important thing about React. You have to note every return statement should be wrapped by one parent component. You can only return one thing. So let's say I wrap all of this inside another div. then you can see the error goes away, and yeah, it's the error goes away now. That's because I'm only returning one element. But let's say as soon as I return another element at the root level, some secondary content, the error comes back because now I'm returning two things again. And if I wrap all of this into another single component, and I wrap all of this into another single component, then you can see the error goes away again because now I'm just returning one component, which is this div element at the very root level. Do you have any questions about this? Okay, so yeah, so this is just like a very basic component in which we're returning some content, some more content, some secondary. So this is very static. Now, in order to make your component usable, you have to export it. Now, what do I mean by exporting? This component currently is just limited to the scope of your file, but you have to make it available to the rest of your React app. So what you need to do for that is you need to export this component, and you can do that by writing this statement: export default and the name of your component, which is my first comp. So what this statement does is it tells your app, it basically exports your component and by the name of first comp, and it tells your app that this is a default export. So you don't need to worry too much about this right now. This is slightly advanced, but you can just look into this later on. But just make sure that you have this default over there. It's telling what this does, it just tells the file that this is the default import, because let's say I had another component in the same file, let's say const second comp, then technically these two components could be exported from the file. So I need to tell which is the default export. So that's what this default keyword does over here. Now that I've exported this component, let me bring this component into my app.js file. You can go into the app.js file and you can do import and just write the name of your component. So I wrote my first comp from, and then you have to put the relative path to the component. So let's say I'm in the source directory right now and my app.js is in the source directory. So you go into dot basically refers to the current directory that you have, and then you go into the components folder, and in the components folder you go into the first comp.jsx file. Yeah. So one thing to note over here is you don't necessarily need to add the .jsx extension. It can pick that up automatically as well. So if you work without it, then also your code will work and compile. Now that I've imported this component, I can use it as an HTML component. So I can do first comp and this. So this is just basically a syntax for writing an empty component. So me writing this thing is equivalent to me writing this. Yeah. So these two statements are essentially the same. The ones that I've highlighted, these two statements, they're the same because it's an empty component. So an empty component can also be written like this. And now let me save this and let me go to my browser. And yeah, you can see that I can see my component over here, some content, some more content, some secondary content. So yeah, and this is just the component that I created. Now let's say I write it multiple of times. So let me just write it 3-4 times. You can see that it gets replicated and I can see a lot of content and it's there 3-4 times. Now, the most significant thing about this is if I make any update to my component. So let's say I remove a line and I write, this is my updated content, and I save the file. You'll see that all of these components get updated automatically. I didn't have to make any changes to my initial code, and all of this was updated automatically. That's because all of these were inheriting from a single component. Perfect. So now so that's all about components, and yeah. So now let me pass a prop to this component. So I go to app.js and let's say I pass a prop which is name, and I do my name is Aaron. So you can just write anything over here. Now, once in order to access a prop, what you need to do is you need to pass in an argument to your function. So initially, this function had an empty argument. So now you need to pass in a argument which is called props. Now, every time you pass in props, this is sort of like the argument which takes into account any props that you pass to it. So this. So now, if I want to access the name inside of my function, I can just do. Let me remove this to simplify stuff. So, and let me just return something. So now hello, and let's say, yeah, so now in order to embed GSX, what you need to do is, first of all, you need to add curly braces over here. So if you add curly braces, you're writing JSX over here. So, and now what I need to do is props.name. So if I go to my page, it says hello Aryan. So as you can see, I only passed a prop to one of the components. So it's only being rendered in one of the components, and I didn't pass anything else over here. So that's currently blank. And in order to access a prop, what you need to do is you need to do props dot whatever your component name is. So let's say your prop name was standing. So in order to access that, you'll need to do props dot standing. Let's say your prop name was hello. You'll need to do props dot hello. And let's say your prop name was name. So in order to access that, you'll need props dot name. And let's say I pass another name equals to dev club over here. So what that does is now you can see this updated to hello dev club because the prop changed and correspondingly had to update what it rendered. And let's say I pass in another prop. Let's say I pass in second name equals let's say I pass in age equals to 12. So you may be wondering why I'm encapsulating numbers inside of curly braces. That's because you can't just write numbers like this in React. You have to enclose anything other than a string in some sort of curly braces. I'll just open up my chat to see if we have any questions right now. No. Yeah. So yeah. So once I wrote age over here, and I can just use that prop as well. So let me go to my first comp and let me write another line. Hello div my age is props.age. Oh, sorry. So now you can see if I just wrote props.age, then nothing happened because it didn't know that I was trying to write JavaScript. Whereas if I embed this in curly braces, now it knows that I'm trying to access props as in the variable prop and not like a string. And it says hello, my age is 12. So I only passed a prop to the third element. So that's why it's visible over here. So that's all about props. Now let's get to state. And do we have any questions? Nope. So that was all about props, and let's get to state. Yeah. So now we saw that props were used for transferring data from a parent component to a child component. But let's say I wanted to update stuff from the inside, from the internal components. And what do I mean by that? I mean that let's say once I was of a certain age, and every 1 second I wanted to increase my age by the number of 1. So you might be wondering that why can't I just do props plus 1? Props.age is equal to props plus 1. Now the thing with that is every time there's any sort of change in the component, this statement will initiate. I can do prop. Oh, sorry, this is wrong. You can do props. So now anytime this component is used, essentially the statement will run all over again. And what it will do is it will keep doing the same thing because at the end of the day, props that are being passed down, props.age is equal to 12, right? So if I do this statement, then what will happen is it will just say that props.age is equal to 12 plus 1, which is 13. But once this happens, this component will try to output stuff again, and this statement will run again, and essentially won't see any change. So let me just go there. You can see that props cannot, yeah, exactly. So it gave an error. So we can't do this. So in order to maintain states inside a variable, we have something called a state. Now, what a state does is you can use this and you can do this. So let me import a state over here, use state. So in order to declare a state variable, what you need to do is you need to import use state, and you have to be very particular about how you import this use state hook over from React. And you need to do age, and then you have to have an editor for this. So you can do set age is equal to use state, and you can do, let's say initially is 12. And let me just clean up some of the code so you can get rid of all the other components for now. Let me just comment out the timer, and let me just go to first com. So in my first com, I just have, let me get rid of this line, and you have my age is this. So it says my age is 12. So are you guys following along? Do we have any questions in the chat over here? Okay. So we have my age is 12, and essentially it's rendering just the age. Yeah, because I initialized it to 12. Yeah. So that's actually a good question. So let me go to my VS Code. Now I declared a state variable age, and I declared a method to update the state variable. I'll talk a bit more about this. And I used this, and this is basically the initial value that you have. This gives an initial value to your variable. So let's say I gave it 20. So then it says my age is 20. If I gave it 30, then it says my age is 30. So this is just the initial value that's given to this variable that you declared. Now let's say what you wanted to do was you have a button. You can have a button, and type is equal to button, and on let's add an event listener. So on in React you can have an event listener, and let's say on click is equal to, and let's give it a function handle click. So now you'll have to declare this function. Right now this function isn't defined, so let me define this function. One thing to note is every time you do something for a component, you have to keep it inside the component. So that's a good thing about React. You can create components to very specific stuff, and their properties will be embedded inside that component. So let me create a function handle click. So let me do const handle click is equal to, and you can declare a function. And yeah, so this is just a function, and what I'm doing is let's say I need to update my age by 10. So I do age is equal to age plus 10. And I do console.log age, and age is a constant. Okay. Yeah. So now, as you can see, age is a constant. So I can't update constants. Otherwise, it'll give me an error, right? So in order to update the age, we need to use the set age function. So what set age does is it basically helps me to update that constant age. So let's say I do set age 20. So now as soon as I click this button, and let me just give this button some text, uh, update my age. So as soon as I do this and I click on this, it'll change that to 20. So let me just refresh the page, and I update my age. Right now it's 30, and when I do this, it'll update it to 20. And right now this seems very simple, but in reality it's actually very powerful, because as soon as you updated a variable, it automatically got updated on your screen, and or you're doing all of that dynamically using JavaScript. So the possibilities with that are pretty much endless. Now that was about state. So every time you update a state, your return function will be called again. And what that does, it basically just updates the content on your screen according to what's there in the state variable. And that's why it's called a state, because let's say I defined a simple variable. Let's say let temp let uh, temp age equals to 20, and let's just define it as 30, and temp age equals to 20, and let me just console.log this, and let me also output this as well. Div my temp age is temp age. So yeah, now let me refresh the page. Right now it says my age is 30, my temp age is 30. But now when I do update my age, only one of those two variables updated. Whereas now you may be what happened? So only one of the two updated. Now you may be wondering why my temp age did not update. That's because temp age, although I set it to 20 and I console.log, and if you look at the value, it did update to 20, but those changes were not reflected in the actual in the actual in the actual HTML. That's because it wasn't a state variable. So until and unless a state variable is updated, this return function will not be called again. And if this isn't called again, then this variable isn't updated. So whereas in the case of 30, this was a normal variable. So this is just like a normal variable, and I updated to 20, and I did console.log age. So although it was updated, it did not update from a rendering point of view. Whereas if it's a state variable, then even though I updated it, it also got updated inside of the render in the user rendering. After, okay, so we have no question in the chat right now. So that's the significance of state variables. It allows us to update our content dynamically and also reflect those updates onto the actual screen. So now that we know about state variables, let's move on to the next sort of thing, which is use effect. Now that the state variable is updated, it's desirable that you might want to perform certain operations depending on the value of your state. So let me just get rid of temp age. So yeah, now let me also use effect is also imported the same way as as you would import use state. So you can do use effect, and yeah. So use effect is also a hook, and right now you don't have to understand in depth like what the syntax is and how it actually works, but so as long as you just understand the basic functioning of use effect, that should be sufficient enough for this lecture, and you can obviously research more about this in your own time. So yeah, so use effect essentially takes into account two parameters. So the first parameter that you see, this is a function, and the second parameter is an array. So what use effect does is it takes into account any changes that happen to state variables. So let's say age. So now, okay. So now that I've written this, let's take a look at what this piece of code does. What it does is it monitors age. Age is sort of like a dependency for use effect. So it monitors age for any changes that happen to it, and depending on any changes, it runs this function. So what this code would do right now is it would look at the state variable age, and it would see that anytime age changes, it will run this function, and this function would essentially console.log, basically output that to our console. So let me go to my React app and let me refresh and open up my console. So right now it's 30. So, and also in my console, you can see 30. I'm not sure if you can see this. Let me make this larger. Yeah. So right now it's also showing 30. And as soon as I click on update my age, you can see 20 appeared over here. And what happened was, as soon as my state variable updated, this function ran, and as soon as this function was complete, it outputted that age to my console. So that's effectively what a use effect does. Now, let's say I wanted to also render stuff based on my age. So let's say let me initialize my initial age as 16 and final age as 20. So yeah, and let me refresh, and yeah, there we go. So what you can do is, now we'll be talking about what's known as conditional rendering. So let's say if I wanted to display certain content based on my state variable, what I can do is, if age is um, greater than or equal to 18, then I want to display certain components. So you can use this method. You are now an adult. Okay. So what this statement would do is basically it checks if your state variable, which is age, is if it's greater than 18, then it would also display this component. And if it's not greater than 18, then it won't display this. So let's see right now what's happening. So right now, let me zoom in. My age is 16 and it's less than 18, so nothing is being displayed. But as soon as I update my age, you can see it says you're now an adult. That's because my state variable updated and it was now greater than 18. So this condition got satisfied, and so this content got rendered. And that's the beauty of React. You can just update one variable and you can do a ton of stuff with it. You can change content that you want to be rendered onto your screen. You can call a function based on the update. You can do pretty much anything with that. And do we have any questions in the chat? How is set age working? Like passing a value to it is changing age. Yes, exactly. So anytime set age is basically updating the value of age to whatever you pass inside of it. It's not necessary that you want to pass a number. You can also pass a string over here. So let's say I pass in hello. Now, it's not recommended that you change variable types. What I mean by that is initially it's a number, but now it's a string. So that sort of thing isn't recommended, but you can do that. So if I go over here, it says my age is 16 and I do update my age. It says my age is hello. That's because I updated it to a string. So, and also you can see that the use effect, it's still doing the same thing, that initially it was 16 and it looked for any changes in the state. And as soon as the state changed, it updated this to hello. And also this is conditional rendering. So obviously when I updated it to hello, it could no longer compare a string with a number. So this condition was never satisfied and this never happened. So yeah, let me change this back to 20, and this is update my age, and now this is function. So what we just saw, that was a use state and a use effect. So yes, those were the two things that we saw. There's another thing called use ref, and we don't have time to go into that right now, but I'd encourage you guys to look into this a bit more on your own. And yeah, so let's talk a bit about the timer code that we have, and I'll try my best to explain it to you, and you can use this as a reference to start building your own code. And also you can read a bit about use ref on your own, and you can read a bit about userf on your own, and you can see how I'm using it over here. And obviously, if you have any doubts, you can post it on our Discord group, and we'll try our best to help you out over there. Where is set age defined? Set age is overriding, but what if you want to increment it? I think, yes, Aditya. Okay, so that's a good point. Let's talk about that first. So if you want to increment an age, you could do age plus one, but the thing is, when you're doing this, it might happen that this function has been called, let's say, thousands of times. So, and the state update isn't complete. And what I mean by that is, obviously, let's say this takes like very small amount of time to happen, and this function is being called before that update is complete. So it would lead to conflicting results, right? Because let's say you do age plus one, age plus one, age plus one 10,000 times, and in between somewhere age hasn't been updated once based on the previous result. So the best way to update the state based on a previous value is you'll pass into it another function. You pass to it another function. So I pass to it age and this just old age. Uh, yeah, so I pass into set age a function and it takes into value an old age. and I return old age plus 1. So this is the proper method for updating the state based on the old state. Now if I go to my React app, now I do this, it became 17. Now I do this, it became 18. Now I do this. It's continuously increasing. And as you can see, my use effect is also working. Every time there's an update to the state, it's console, it's outputting that to the console. And let me do this. So yeah, so this is a proper method for updating a state based on the old value. You pass into it a function, and the function takes into the takes a parameter which is the old age, and you return old age plus 1. So this is the proper method for updating a state based on an old value. Is it asynchronous? Yeah. Okay. So let's not get into all that asynchronous synchronous right now. So let's keep that for later. So those are the basics of use state, use effect. We saw props, and we saw conditional rendering, and we saw event listeners, which is just like on click and passing it to a function. And do we have any more chat questions or not? Nope. Okay, perfect. So now let me just explain to you the basics of the timer app. And I understand that you might not get it completely right now, but you have this code with you, and you can use it as a reference for learning React. And just like when you have a better handle on React, you can see that what I've done there, and you can obviously post any questions that you have regarding this on our Discord group. Yeah, so let's go and let me just go back and remove my component and uncomment the timer component. So this is my timer component. Let me zoom out. Okay, so the first things first, the timer component takes a prop by the name of duration, and that's basically the duration of the timer that you want. And let's go over here. So okay, so I initialize a constant called duration by the name of props.duration. So that's just for me to know that what's the duration that I want the timer to run. Now I've used a lot of state variables and of different types. So this is a Boolean type, and this is an integer type. I've also used ref, but we don't have time to cover that in the lecture right now, but you can refer to this on your own, and you can see that what it's doing. So we have start timer and set start timer. So start timer is the variable, and set start timer is the function that will help us to update that. And then you have timer ended, so that's again another state variable, and you have a function to update it. You have time, that's another state variable, and you have a function to update that. And let me go to my HTML code. So my HTML code is simply time remaining is, and then you have the state variable over here. Now so timer ended basically maintains if my timer has ended or not. So if it's false, it means that my timer is running, and if it's true, that means my timer has ended. And start timer is basically a track to know if my timer has started or not. So if it's false, my timer has not started, and if it's true, my timer has started. So I go into my HTML and I look at what's happening. So it first of all checks if the timer has ended or not. So if my timer has not ended, then I'm conditionally rendering the button which will start my timer. So this is button, and on click it says handle click, and you have start timer. So this is again a ternary operator. So what this does is it checks for start timer. If start timer is true, then it outputs this. Otherwise, it outputs this. So I'm sure you must have you guys must have heard about a ternary operator. Okay, so I'll just tell you again, just in case anyone was not familiar with that. So a ternary operator is basically you put a question mark after the variable name, and if the variable that you or the condition that you had over here is true, then this condition will be executed. Otherwise, this condition would be executed. So what I wanted was, if my timer had started, I wanted to show the button with the stop text. So like if I start my timer, I wanted to show you stop text. Whereas if my timer had not started, I wanted to show the start text, because right now my timer is not running. So I wanted to show you the start text, but if I started it, my timer started, and I wanted to show the stop text on the button. So that's what this condition is doing. And the button is responsible for handling a click. So now if I look at this function definition, handle click, uh, it's basically changing the value of start timer to the inverse. So yeah, I just told you about a state-based update, right? So it's taking the old value of start timer and it's inverting that value. And now let's go over here. So this is it. So now we have a use effect. What this use effect is doing is it's monitoring start timer. Now, if my timer has not started, that means I want to set my timer ended to false and return set timer duration. What this does is it basically just like resets my timer to the start. So let's say this and this. So yeah, so right now my timer is running and I do this. So in that case, my timer started would have been set to false. And when that happened, I would go into this condition. And this what this would do is set timer ended to false if it was true by any chance. And it would set the timer duration back to the initial duration, which is this, which is passed down using props. Uh, I'll talk a bit about this in a moment. And otherwise, if my timer had started, then it would render this condition. And what this would do is it would set an interval for decreasing the time state by 1 every second. So this is just a standard JavaScript function. It's not related to React as such. You can look up set interval, and set interval is used for running a function repeatedly at a particular interval of time. So I'm running it after every 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So I'm running this function after every 1,000 seconds, and that's what my set interval is doing. I'm using a ref over here, but I don't think we have time to get into what that does right now. So you guys can look into a bit more about refs on your own, and I'm sure this code will make a lot of sense to you after doing that. Now, what I'm doing is I'm monitoring, and I have another use effect over here. So I'm monitoring if my time reaches zero. That means my timer has ended. That means I've run out my state variable. So let's say once this reaches zero, it means my timer has ended. So I want to monitor when my timer has ended. So I'm using another use effect to monitor the state of my timer. And if my timer has ended, I want to set timer ended to be true. Now, once I set timer ended to be true, this statement would be false. This statement is false, and this statement would be true. So therefore, you can see that the button changes to a reset button, and this text appears. And all of this is being conditionally rendered based on the variable name timer ended. So if timer ended is true, then these two things will be rendered. Whereas if timer ended is false, then this would be rendered. So yes, and now once that's happened, I can just on reset, I can add another event listener, which is handle reset. Now, what handle reset would do, that would set my timer ended to false. It would set my time back to the duration because I want to effectively reset the timer. And also the timer is no more started, so I would also set that to false. So that's what my reset function is doing. Now, the only thing that we didn't talk about here is this clear interval thing. So what this is doing is when this timer had started, I had set an interval. That means I wanted to run this particular function after every 1 second. Now I need to stop running this function, right? Otherwise my timer would continue to decrease. So in order to do that, I need to clear this interval. And in order to clear an interval, you have to pass in an argument, which is a reference to the original set interval function. So that reference was being stored in timeref.current. Now this is a ref property, so I would encourage you to explore refs on your own if you're interested in React, and you'll get a bit more clarity on what timeref.current is. But essentially, it's just like a pointer to my set interval. And clear interval is again a JavaScript function. It's not related to React in any way. It's essentially just clearing that interval and telling our browser to stop running this function after an interval of 1 second. So it's effectively clearing that set interval. So hence the name clear interval. And once it does that, my state stops decreasing by a value of 1. So that's why the timer stops once it gets to 0. So as you can see, it stops once it gets to 0 because I cleared that interval. So that means this function was not running anymore. So that's about it with the timer app. I know it could seem a lot to take in such a short duration, but this code is available on GitHub, and you can either clone the entire repository or you can do the method that I just walked through at the beginning of this lecture, and you can explore this on your own. And I'd encourage you to read a bit more about refs. We'll also share the lecture slides with you. This basically contains most of the stuff that I told you. It contains a bit about ref as well, and you can use that for reference. And you can obviously refer to the official React documentation. So if I just type in React documentation, you'll see a lot about React. You'll see getting started. It contains everything that I talked about today. You have props, you have components, you have use state, you have use effect, all that. So React has very nice documentation. So I'd encourage all of you to explore that. And yeah, that's about it. So there are some alternatives to React. These are like similar frameworks to React, but obviously they have some differences. They're also all based on JavaScript. So as you can see, Next.js, Gatsby.js, they're slightly different from React and they have their own concepts. But that was pretty much it for React, and that's about it. So if you have any questions. What's our assignment? Could you add the first comp to GitHub? Okay, yeah. So I'll add my first comp to the GitHub repo as well. I'll commit it right after this lecture. And okay, so as such, you don't have a React assignment, but if you're interested in learning a bit more about React, I'd encourage you to look at this GitHub repository and get a clear understanding of what the set timer function, of what the timer component did. And I encourage you to learn about React. So we'll be releasing another assignment tonight. So that won't be based on React though, and more information about that will follow up shortly. Uh, yes, so that's about it. And there's a feedback link to the form in the chat. I'd encourage you to fill that out. Sir, how many? Okay, yeah. So for the recruitments, there's no hard and fast limit on how many people will be inducted to our club. It's basically depending on, it's not even, it's based on some extent to your skill, but moreover, it's about your passion towards development and how involved you are in all of these activities that are going on and all that. There's no fixed number, so even if I tell you how many were selected last year, it doesn't matter, and this number always goes up from year to year because please share on Discord the links. Okay, yeah, we'll share all the links on Discord. We'll also post a feedback form on Discord shortly, so you can fill it over there. And as for how many people will be inducted, so there's no hard and fast rule that we will only induct 30 people or 40 people. We'll take in many people as we see fit, and if we see that you have skill and potential for growth, even if you aren't like at the best level right now, we'll still take you in and we'll mentor you and we'll improve your coding skills inside the club. So does the name here uh, what do you mean by that? I'm not sure. When will the final inductions be? So, yes, so the inductions will also be happening shortly in your second semester. So, stay tuned for that. And no, the name here does not matter. You can just fill in the feedback form based on your real name, and like that will just help us to judge if you were a part of this lecture or not. Any assignment today? Yeah, so there's no assignment for React today, but there'll be an assignment on web scraping, and we'll share that by tonight on your Discord channel. So please stay active on that. As and it'll also be floated on your WhatsApp group using your hostel rep. So stay out on the lookout for that. And that's about it. So if you have any React specific lectures, I'm here for another couple of minutes. So either you can ping it on the chat or you can use the Discord React channel. And React is a very beautiful framework. So I'd encourage every one of you to explore it a bit more. And yeah, you can create a lot of powerful stuff with React, and it gives you abilities that would be otherwise very tough to do with standard HTML. So, just a interesting thing to wrap up the lecture. So, I think you might have seen this in your orientation as well. So, portfolio creator that you see, this was created entirely in React, and I myself created this at the end of my first year. So, it's React it seems overwhelming at first, but it's pretty easy to learn, and you can obviously get started with it, like I told you today. And this entire app, yeah, you see, was created in React. So try logging into it using your account and try exploring it. So this was all done in React, and this code was written by me personally. So I can vouch that React is pretty powerful. And yeah, that's about it. So if you have anything else, I'm on this chat for a couple more minutes. Otherwise, thanks for attending, and yeah, thanks for attending, and hope you learned something today. Will we have React assignments for later? It's possible because in the front end assignment that you get, it would be effectively based on creating some sort of web app. So uh, it will probably keep it open, and it will be your choice that if you want to use React or you want to use static HTML or and CSS. So it will be your choice. So yeah. Portfolio Creator, yes, it's open source. It's available on the Dev Club repository. There are two repositories for Portfolio Creator. So the one pertaining to React is portfolio. It's Porty frontend. I'll put a name for it in the chat. Porty frontend. This is also on the Dev Club repo, so you can have a look at that. And that the code over there, that's based on classes. So, but the latest notation that we have in React, it's based on functions. Can for web scraping, can we use JS instead of Python? I'm not sure. You'll have to look at the exact specification of the assignment. And if there's something that's confusing to you, then you can put a message on the Discord group, and we'll try our best to help you out as soon as possible. Thank you, guys. Thanks. Yep. So, yeah, that's about it for today, and we'll take the other doubts that you have on Discord. So, if it's pertaining to React, just leave a message on the React channel. Otherwise, if it's like a general assignment related doubt, uh, you can put a message out on the general channel, and we'll help you out over there. Thank you.